They've seized a building and taken hostages. One man has managed to escape and is trapped inside.
I'm starting to get a bad feeling up there.
John McClane didn't want to be a hero,
Send the police now!
but he's the only chance they've got. Bruce Willis in Die Hard. 40 stories of sheer adventure. Rated R.
Now playing in selected cities. Starts Wednesday, July 20th at theaters everywhere.
This is obviously a James Bond-focused YouTube channel. No, really, it is. But if you've been following me for a while, then you'll know that I love to talk about other iconic film series too. Indiana Jones, Mission Impossible, Jason Bourne, and when it comes to action heroes, John McClane is most certainly in the top 10 of most lists going, and with good reason.
Welcome to the party, pal!
Good evening, Mother Enjoyers. I want to lay my cards out on the table up front regarding my own experience with the Die Hard film series up to this point. I think it's important for me to let you know where I'm coming from, because despite my acknowledgement that yes, this is a classic film series, this is an iconic character in John McClane, the first movie in particular means a great deal to a great many people. Despite all that, I've never really been all that into this series personally. So prior to this video, I've seen the first two films of the series a couple of times apiece. The third film I remember seeing on, I think it was on TV, and I think I recorded it on VHS and watched it then, and then I've seen the fourth one. I remember quite distinctly actually watching it on a plane. It was an in-flight entertainment movie in like 2008, and I've never seen the fifth one. So I'm by no means coming into this review series as a fan of this series, but I have to admit that I'm not necessarily a skeptic either. I mean, do you ever just have it where it's as if you've actively been avoiding a movie or series, but you've just never really gotten around to giving it the time it deserves? So when my Patreon supporters voted that this would be the next long-lasting iconic cinematic series I cover in its entirety on the channel, I was thrilled to finally have a good excuse to deep dive into all things Die Hard, starting of course with the very first one. This is typically where I give a brief summary of the plot. It feels slightly redundant, as I think everyone knows the plot to this film, right? I mean, Bruce Willis is John McClane of the New York police. He travels to LA on Christmas Eve, where his estranged wife and two children now reside. John is hoping to make up with his wife Holly, played by Bonnie Bedelia, and I could probably think of better places to appeal to a distanced spouse than their office Christmas party, where there will be copious booze and unsolicited opinions from co-workers aplenty, but all that is cut short when Alan Rickman's Hans Gruber leads his band of terrorists in an assault on the building, taking everyone at the party hostage in the process. Everyone except for John McClane, of course, who is able to sneak away, and thus begins the battle of wits and guns as McClane tries to thwart the terrorists, save the hostages, and of course, get back with his wife before Santa is done with his rounds. It's famously an incredibly simple plot, more or less sticks to one location, but exploits the hell out of it, and to brilliant effect. And from listening to the audio commentaries on the Blu-ray, doing my reading up on the behind-the-scenes stuff for the film, I was incredibly surprised to hear just how much of this was constructed on the fly. Die Hard is a film of such effective precision. I just kind of assumed that everything would have been storyboarded, script will have been locked and such, but no, they didn't even have a locked ending by the time filming had started. Not that this is necessarily an uncommon thing for big budget Hollywood movies like this, but because everything about Die Hard is so precise and confident, I think that it's quite amazing, really, from a filmmaking perspective, because as a viewer watching it, it just feels so effortless and sure of itself, and it's always amazing when a film can convey that sense despite, behind the camera, all of the creatives are tearing their hair out on a daily basis and having to really think on their feet. And speaking of behind the camera, one of the main reasons I was looking forward to revisiting Die Hard was because over the course of the last few years, I've actually become quite a fan of director John McTiernan. I've made video reviews for The Hunt for Red October and The Thomas Crown Affair, both films that I have a lot of love for now, and along with revisiting Die Hard, I've come to realize I really do love John McTiernan's directorial style. He's such an efficient and effortlessly economical filmmaker. His films are tight and lean. He knows exactly when to move the camera and when to keep it still. I think he absolutely nails tone. But I mean, that's especially important here in Die Hard, and I was interested to hear him talking about this very specific point in the film's audio commentary.
A terrorist story is, by definition, dark and unhappy. But with a good caper, you can appreciate the bad guys too. And that allows us to put essentially some joy in the bad guy's activity, which, it's a silly sort of thing that you don't discuss with studio executives because they'll think you're untrustworthy, but putting some joy in this story was my principal concern going into it. Finding ways that you could get some humor that wasn't forced, but at least lightness, and finding ways in which you could simply enjoy what was going on, rather than having, the bad guys do very bad things that make you hate them, and then you get even and do bad things to them in return. It's not a joyful experience.
It obviously proved to be a masterstroke of judgment because Die Hard is an incredibly rewatchable film. It's a fun film despite a lot of very dark subject matter, and I guess it has suitably, I suppose, a harder edge to it. It's a pretty incredible juggling act between feeling more grounded and real whilst also having these fantastical and incredibly Hollywood action movie moments, like when McClane goes jumping off the roof of the building on a hose as the rooftop explodes above him, the crashing through the window totally reminded me of that scene from Tomorrow Never Dies 2, by the way. And just going back to the subject of tone, Bruce Willis clearly understood the assignment as well, because he's just pitch perfect as the hero here. For some reason, I had a false memory about his whole technophobe thing being overdone to the point of annoyance. I might have been conflating this with memories I have of one or indeed more of the sequels, but in my head, John McClane was largely categorized by being the guy who'd be grumbling at the thought of using a calculator because that's too highfalutin for him, but in Die Hard, it's really just an amusing aspect of his character that pops up every once in a while, like when he's signing in to visit his wife at the building, they have this computer thing, and he makes a little wry comment about it, but it's nothing beyond that, really. He's obviously presented as a very salt-of-the-earth kind of guy, and he's totally out of his usual environment at this swanky, stylish, opulent office space filled with all these West Coast yuppies, but it doesn't feel like it's overdone. It just feels like a nice bit of setup for his character. There's a lot in these opening scenes of him looking at stuff and reacting, and you can just gauge so much about him from how he responds to things, what catches his eye. It's something that I always associate with Alfred Hitchcock, just the process of watching a movie where you're seeing a character looking at something, you see what they look at, you see them react, and their reaction tells you something about them. I know it sounds really damn basic, but there is an art to it, and I think that John McTiernan has the art down to a fine tee. One of my favourite moments in the whole film is the bit where Hans Gruber and Holly McClane are talking, and at that point he doesn't know the connection between her and John, and then she looks over to the photo frames. She remembers that there's a photo there of her and John that could totally rumble the pair of them, and it's face down, and she realises this, but she just barely reacts, and she does just enough that Gruber can clock it, and I just think it's a brilliant setup for later, but, sometimes I think I could just happily watch a whole film of people just looking at things and then each other and reacting, and I'd be happy. Oh wait, yeah, that is Rear Window, and I guess that is one of my favourite films. But yes, Willis is just a fantastic lead here. I know all of the context from the time of, people didn't know if he could be an action hero, but here he plays the action hero part really well, and whilst also playing him as a grounded guy who's just in the wrong place at the wrong time, and he's just suddenly the most important person in this building all of a sudden. I think every single part here is cast to perfection, in all honesty. I mean, Alan Rickman is just another pitch-perfect performance. He is menacing and threatening, but also camp, and a lot of fun to watch. It's a very delicate balance again, but he just pulls it off perfectly, and the cat-and-mouse game between him and McClane is a lot of fun to watch. And in fact, another one of my favourite scenes in the whole film is just the bit where they're just talking to each other, and McClane doesn't know for absolute certainty that Gruber is Gruber, and just how the suspense of that plays out, I thought was tremendously effective, as well as just being a good excuse to get these characters into a place where they can just both talk to each other in and amongst all of the action. I love Bonnie Bedelia as Holly McClane too, her chemistry with Willis. They really do feel like an authentic couple that are going through a rough patch and growing apart, and he's this salt-of-the-earth type person. You get the sense that she probably was as well when they first met, but as her career has progressed and she's moved to LA and she has this Rolex watch that pops up in a few places, and it's a bit of a symbolic device. The climax of the film, of course, depends on McClane unclasping the watch and letting it fall along with the villain, and then she and John can reconcile. I think it all plays out really nicely, and Holly is a really great character. Gruber's whole band of villains are really interesting. So many of them are these stereotypical Euro trash model types. They've all got beautiful blonde hair, they're muscly, they're a leather jacket and some assless chaps away from looking like Tom of Finland illustrations brought to life, but then there are a few other henchmen that don't fit into that exact mold, including Gruber himself, which I think is interesting. Like, it would have been easy to make Gruber seem like just some Nazi type if he were completely surrounded by these, Aryan, idealized henchmen, but the diversity of his crew pulls him back from that, and I think it makes the whole backstory of this gang all the more intriguing. Like, how the hell did all of these people decide to go into business together? This being a Bond channel, I do, of course, have to mention that one of the henchmen here is played by Andreas Wisniewski, who, of course, played Necros in The Living Daylights. I enjoyed seeing him here, and the Dalton connections don't stop there either. Robert Darby and Grand L. Bush, both actors from License to Kill, appear as FBI agents Johnson & Johnson, and they're an awful lot of fun together. All these are small roles, but very impactful and effective at the same time. Reginald VelJohnson is probably the most significant other supporting character as Police Sergeant Al Powell, and he's great. I mean, seriously, every part here is really well cast. There was a comment made on the audio commentary that John McTiernan has a real knack for casting faces, and I have to agree with that. Everyone here is distinctive, and that's important because despite the plot being relatively simple, there are a lot of characters at play and various machinations going on at any one time, so it's nice that all of these parts are memorable faces and characters each have their own little quirks that make them memorable. It's all just really terrific, and that extends to the production design too, which is just beautiful. I mean, the Nakatomi Plaza is obviously an iconic movie location, but the film takes place on all of these different floors, and each of the floors have their own distinct personality, quite frankly, so I am never lost regarding the geography of this film. I'm doing an awful lot of praising of the film so far, so you might well be wondering why I was categorizing myself at the start of this video as a bit of a non-fan, really. God, I really hate to fess up to this, but despite my having seen Die Hard in its entirety a couple of times and then in bits and pieces throughout the years in the past, this is actually my first time watching Die Hard whilst devoting my full attention to it, which I know is a really terrible thing. My movie buff status should be rescinded, I should be banished from Letterboxd, but hear me out, please. The first time I ever saw this film, I was at university and I was watching it with some of my friends who were all really into it, and I admit, I came into it with preconceived notions of what it would be, and I was just looking to be the contradictory voice in the room, and there was a lot of alcohol and chat going on at the same time. It really wasn't the best time for me to be experiencing this film for the first time. I've seen it in bits and pieces over the years. I've had it on as background noise while I was wrapping Christmas presents, so for this viewing I made sure that I was going to watch it completely uninterrupted. Phone went in another room, curtains were drawn, you could set off a nuclear bomb in central London, and I would not move from this sofa, and I'm really glad that I did, because so much of the preciseness of what is going on in Die Hard really needs a person's full attention to appreciate. This viewing, quite honestly, turned me into a fan of this film. I think one of the more off-putting things for me personally when I was coming to see this film for the first time in like 2008, 2009, was that I feel that around that time and in some of the years that followed, there was just this explosion of, particularly online, just a lot of debate and discussion about, is Die Hard a Christmas movie? And I just got so sick of hearing about it, because it's something that I genuinely do not care about. I don't think it matters whether this film is classified by the majority of people as a Christmas film or not. I just don't care. But seeing around that time so much, like, debate and what have you online, where people get really angry about the thing, I was just so... I think it really just negatively affected my first impressions of the thing going into it. For the record, I would agree with people that say it's a Christmas film. I would classify it as a Christmas film. It's set at that time of year, obviously. The whole notion of it being an office Christmas party is an effective device for explaining why all of these co-workers are in a building together with no one else populating the structure, so the fact that it is Christmas is relevant to the plot. It seems fairly obvious to me that, yeah, it's a Christmas film, but then, hey, I routinely watch Black Christmas and Gremlins every year as part of my festive film season, so I definitely don't expect all of my Christmas films to be of the warm and cuddly variety. But I do want to caveat that I don't really care enough to get into any kind of debate about it. If you don't consider Die Hard a Christmas film, fine, whatever, good for you, and I think I'm just scarred, to be perfectly honest, from those 2008-2009 days where I just became so irritated with a lot of the, well, frankly, confrontation baiting that I'd see online, and indeed was subjected to a few times in person. So what's your favourite Christmas movie? Bit of a weird question for April, but probably It's a Wonderful... Die Hard. Okay. Yeah, most people don't even think that Die Hard's a Christmas film, you know, but it totally is. Okay. Yeah, well, I mean, it takes place at that time of year, of course. The fact it's an office Christmas party is totally important to the plot, as well as thematically speaking. The 12 Days of Christmas are all represented throughout the film's various action sequences. Anyway, back to the film. I think as an action film, it is tremendously effective. It is thrilling to watch. The whole rooftop stuff with the helicopter was a real highlight for me, as was the scene where McClane is trying to get through this ventilation shaft. I let out an audible yelp at one point because I was so into the scene. I think the film excels with suspense. The whole bit with Holly's coked-up co-worker trying to be the big man and save the day in this scene with Gruber is just brilliantly chilling. Just this guy comes swaggering in full of this misguided confidence that every other character is aware is misguided, and we as an audience know it's misguided, but he thinks he's the one with the upper hand in this whole thing, and then the reality of the situation dawning on him is such a brilliant moment. Oh my god, I love that scene. This has all been a very positive review so far, but if I do have some minor criticism of the film, I'd say that I did feel a bit of a lull at one point, specifically after the McClane-Gruber scene together. After that point, I was kind of ready to go all guns blazing into the climax, but there's around 10 minutes or so where stuff is happening, but I don't know, just pacing-wise, I felt it plateaued for a little bit as, you know, the various pieces of the plot were being placed to set up the climax. The vault getting opened, Holly being found out as McClane's spouse. It's all stuff that obviously has to happen in order for the climax to really kick into gear, but nonetheless, I just felt it was a bit of a lull where I was ready to just charge forward. Still a minor quibble, because I do think that Die Hard is one of the most accomplished and polished action films that there is, and its legacy and influence are very evident. I'm looking forward to reviewing and indeed revisiting some of the sequels now that I'm kind of armed with this greater appreciation of this first film, and I'm keen to see if the memories of the ones that I have seen hold up, especially regarding number 4, because I remember really liking it when I saw it on an aeroplane way back when, but I know that it has something of a mixed reception from fans. So yes, looking forward to reviewing each of the sequels in turn, and I hope you'll join me on the rest of this journey. Do let me know in the comment section below your thoughts on Die Hard, as well as how you think I'm going to fare with the rest of this series. Do you think I'm gonna perhaps controversially like one of the other ones more than this first one? I do remember having really good memories of number 4, as I say, but do let me know in the comment section below. Also below are links to my various social medias. There's the subscribe button and the Mrs. Bell notification button, which you can hit to stay up to date on future video uploads. And with all that being said, and until next time, Mother Enjoyers, so long for now.